بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum everybody and welcome back to Connections. We are on episode 4 and I hope you have been having a good time listening to our conversations, digesting our conversations, trying to make this relevant for you. If it is relevant for you, we know this is a novel conversation, talking about trauma, talking about somatic work, talking about its relationship with spirituality and the Muslim lifestyle and the Muslim consciousness. And so we hope that this has been productive and been useful for all of you. We are open to comments and open to requests. So if there's any theme or any point in relationship to anything we've talked about that you would like us to touch upon further, to further clarify and expand, please feel free to leave a comment below or to reach out to us personally. We are wanting to make this conversation as accessible and relatable as possible, inshallah ta'ala. So today we are on episode 4, and previously we've talked about trauma, introduction to trauma, we talked about agency, talked about the importance of somatic work and the somatic approach to trauma healing. And today we wanted to be able to touch upon another really important element of this work and its relationship with the Muslim life and the Muslim consciousness, and that is of spirituality, tasawwuf, or just ihsan and the connection to Allah Ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and how that relates to this work that we're doing here. Because, you know, sometimes when we have these conversations, people will ask me, are you trying to bring something comparable to our classic form or classic institution of spirituality? Are you trying to negate something? Are you trying to override something? Or, you know, what are you trying to do here with this work? And what I often say to that is say, no, we're not trying to negate or deconstruct or substitute or come with something new. What we're trying to do here is really touch upon a need of the community that has not been really addressed. And this need of trauma healing, of psychological emotional work, even I would offer, you know, as a naturopathic doctor, even our physical health has not really been attuned to and spoken to properly as a Muslim community at large. Like, we're not really talking about what it means to be well and how to take care of ourselves and the Muslim approach to food and rest and exercise and all of that. So, I mean, there's a lot we've I think, not taken care of in our communities, but in this conversation, we're talking about psychological, emotional health directly. And what is really interesting for me in this conversation is really talking about the rights of things, right? Islam itself came as a deen that was kamil, shamil, perfect, comprehensive, speaking to the entire experience of the human being, And so, you know, what we find is that in spirituality, it is not only about the relationship with oneself and God or oneself and the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Because if it was for many of us, we have that and no problem. You know, we can just spend our days and nights in dhikr, in meditation, in in ritual practice and forms of worship, and that would be enough if that was enough. But Islam, you know, deen mu'amala, you know, deen is relational, and things have rights over us. Things have rights over us. You know, like your whole body has a right over you. Haqqul jism, your own physiological process, your sleep has a right over you. Your eye has a right over you. Your wife has a right over you. Your spouse has a right over you. So these are things that, you know, in the Islamic conception of spirituality, what it means to be a good Muslim, what it means to be someone who's connected to the prophetic inheritance, being, you know, having an awareness and a wherewithal to take care of the needs that surround one are necessary for the spirituality, right? And so I consider this work to be taking care of our haqqul zawj, the haqq of the spouse, the haqq of the body, and all of that, because it's an imperative. It's not something that we can bypass and say, just pray more and fast more and do more dhikr, and that suffices, because we'll stand on the day of judgment having maybe a mountain of deeds, and yet, you know, we weren't good to our spouses or our kids. We were abusive, you know, we were gaslighting, we were people that didn't honor them, respect them, you know. I mean, these are, and on and on and on. These are things that will be taken to task for. Even your own limbs will speak against you if you don't honor them and treat them well and work with them in a way that Allah Ta'ala wants us to work with them. So this is what I really wanted to start off with, because, you know, we cannot just be spiritual and not take care of needs. Part of the prophetic way was that he was with God. He was with Allah Ta'ala in a way that, you know, how do we even make sense of the way the Prophet ﷺ was with Allah Ta'ala? And yet also he was with all of us. He was with his people. He was with his family. He mended things that broke around him. He was a mender. He was a healer. He was real. And in that, for me, is a tremendous inspiration, because I don't see spirituality as this far away thing or this deep within thing. It's, you know, it's in everything that we do. You know, it's in everything that we do is spirituality. And so how can we create the foundation, create the conditions for a healthy spirituality? With our diet, with our exercise, with everything, with our emotional work, which we've been talking about here directly, in our relationships, because these things are critical. And if those things are not healthy, that is a barometer that, I mean, your spirituality is probably not the healthiest either. These things are barometers. You know, you want to be able to take a mirror and look at what you're doing and how you're perceived, and be able to rectify those things. It's not just about how much dhikr that you do, how many salawat. I do 5,000 salawat, 10,000 salawat. I hold the dhikr in my house, and so I'm the great Puba Sheikh, and, you know, that won't mean much if you're not taking care of the needs. And so we wanted to be able to do that, to speak to this, inshallah ta'ala, today. And I'm joined today, alhamdulillah, again by Sheikh Idris. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Idris.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks for joining us today, alhamdulillah.
No problem, you're most welcome.
Alhamdulillah. So, Sidi, you know, I wanted to frame that a little bit around needs. And I think it's really important to be able to understand that, you know, Islam, Iman, Ihsan, it speaks to different parts of us. And you know, spirituality is not just, it's not just about Ihsan. It's not just Ihsan. You know, there are other components. And so how do you kind of, when people come to you, I'm sure they do, and say, you know, Sheikh Idris, I know you're doing this trauma work, you're doing the somatic work. How is that related to spirituality? And how do you organize that and describe it to them?
Yeah, it's a big issue. I mean, I think first and foremost, what you were addressing at the beginning of this session was really important for us to highlight, that these are conversations, and it's an exploration, and it's an inquiry, and we are speaking from, you know, our own, we're processing things and exploring things from our studies, from our teachers, and from our clinical practice as well. And what lands and speaks to something, it's important that people explore that. And what doesn't land, then, you know, and you don't relate to, then that's not a problem. We're not speaking to you, maybe. Or if you feel challenged by these things, it's really important to reach out and reach out to us and ask us and have that inquiry. That's what I found so beneficial about many of the Facebook posts I put on. People do challenge what I've posted, and that's when we start to really get a more nuanced and deeper understanding and appreciation of what's being spoken to. Because I think it's natural that people will misunderstand or you know, something when they first read it and take it from a particular perspective. It's only when you guys reach out to us and then say, look, what do you mean by this? That either side of us, we're going to be able to get a greater clarification of what, you know, we're going to be able to get a bit greater insight into what we're speaking to. And then you yourselves will get a greater appreciation of what we're speaking to as well. And that's really important, that. And so when it comes to spirituality in this work, I think what's really important, first and foremost, is like, what is spirituality? I think that's really important, that what we define spirituality. And there's many ways to describe spirituality. I suppose obviously the Prophet ﷺ, if we're saying spirituality is ihsan, is to worship God as if you see him. There's a relational piece to something bigger than yourself. That's what spirituality is. So spirituality, like I've summarized it as this, is like having a connection to something bigger than yourself, that is bigger than this world, and you feel a connection with, and you realize you're dependent on that thing, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about spirituality. And that has cognitive aspects to it, i.e. I want to do the right thing, I want to please Allah, and then that has experiential qualities, i.e. you feel you've got it working, you're in relationship with Allah. And that's what we're speaking about when we're speaking about spirituality. It's related to something bigger than you. Whilst in the healing work, often more than not, and these are huge, you know, we're generalizing obviously, and that's all we can do. It's the focus on you. It's not the focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala necessarily. But that's not to discount that when we do this work, we naturally will be opening up to something bigger. Because when you heal, you unfold and you emerge. And in doing so, you connect to yourself and others and Allah. So I see this work as foundational so that your spirituality can blossom. But that doesn't mean that we are replacing spirituality. And I think if we even look at Al-Balkhi's work, he did name it, I think, Tibb al-Ruhani, that this is spiritual medicine. But so because what we're trying to do is we are trying to transcend and able to grow, but we also want to include. And the problem with a lot of spirituality today is we try to transcend and avoid,
negate,
or negate, or eradicate, or whatever you're doing, you don't want to be with where we are at right now. And the thing what was so profound with me with Hakeem, I think I've mentioned this before, is that when I was doing this work, I was like, open my eyes and said, wow, it doesn't matter. I don't need to get rid of this thing, this anxiety. I actually feel like I've still got the anxiety, but I've got a bigger perspective and I can hold this, and then it doesn't have as much hold on me. So we're not trying to eradicate. We're trying to really explore how to see things from a bigger perspective, but with not discounting where we're at the same time. And this is how I understand this work. And so it's not spirituality, but it is spirituality in terms of it leads. And these things in Islam, they're all interconnected. So this is why I love the Prophet ﷺ's sort of separation. He says Islam is Islam and Iman and Ihsan. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. What? Islam is Islam, Iman, Ihsan. What? Islam and then there's Islam. No, naturally we're going to, when we're trying to understand things in themselves, separated from other aspects, we naturally will have some sense of it's not fully going to be true to the real nature of things, but we have to do that when we study. But then we appreciate that once we've got some cognitive grasp on something, they're all interrelated and connected. And as Muslims, historically, that's how we see things. And so we're just looking at the nafs, basically. And when I say nafs, I don't mean in a negative sense, an egoic formulation. I mean in terms of ourselves, who we are and how we relate to it. This is the work we're doing. And once you gain a greater relationship of that, and because it's, Charles Upton had a really important point here about the nafs. In Islam, unlike other traditions, this like the soul that incites to evil, the soul that is reflective and blames, reproaching, and the soul that's at peace. These are states. It's not like we're trying to eradicate an object. So the actual one thing grows into something else.
Beautiful.
That's really important from an Islamic perspective. We see that we are trying to grow this thing and nurture this thing. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. So that he's trying to, the one successful is the one that enables it to grow and flourish and blossom. And who's the one that loses out? The one that tries to stomp on it, literally stunt it. That's what we're talking about in this work. And and it's really important. So when it comes to spirituality, we're not trying to discredit spirituality at all. We're trying to provide a foundation so people can go into spirituality healthier.
That's it. That's it. And you know, when you were speaking, I recalled something that one of the ulama said, that to be prophetic, you must first be human.
Yeah.
Meaning we can't just jump from being, you know, nafs amara basu to being, you know, the Muhammadan, you know, qutb or something. You know, it's like you have to go through stages, and Allah Ta'ala creates through stages developmentally in everything that we do, physically, physiologically, neurologically, emotionally. I mean, we start off as small and we grow and grow and grow and we grow, and we include more capacities, more faculties, more skills, more consciousness, you know, the consciousness of me, and then the consciousness of me and my mom, and then, oh, but dad's there too, and then the family, and then the tribe, and then, you know, the Prophet ﷺ brought this awareness of consciousness of the whole world and beyond. And there's parallel universes, and there's God, and there's 7 heavens, and you know, when people were in Jahiliyyah, they were just, it's just us versus the world. He just blew the lid off that and allowed for the natural, beautiful flow into a greater consciousness, honoring still the tribe and the family and the rights of the self, and saying you don't have to negate, transcend, and include. I love that so much. And that for me speaks to everything in medicine, everything in this work that we're doing, and to Islam. I really believe in the spirituality that we're trying to achieve. You know, transcend and include. We don't have to blame anybody. We don't have to. And you find that people, I mean, when you read the books of the great people, it's like they'll find multiple excuses, and they'll because it's like they're so vast. It's not, they're not trying to, you know, spiritually hack their hearts, and they actually truly find multiple, perhaps there's another avenue where they can arrive at that, and maybe like, and you know, they're so vast. It's not that they are not clear about what's true and what's not true, and you know, it's not that, quite the contrary, but because their horizon is so expanded and they've included what's underneath it, they're just more open. They can be super clear with themselves, and maybe very rigorous with themselves. With other people, they can just be, you know, as vast as the heavens and the earth, and that's a beautiful quality to have. But if everything's rigid, and this is one of the consequences or implications of unhealed trauma, is like you become very rigid, and rigidness is the opposite of wholeness. Rigidness is the antithesis of feeling, and we try to protect ourselves as a result of the trauma, so we kind of close off on these elements. So we close up from the higher expansive states, and even from the lower states, we just kind of stagnate. And everything should be in a proper flow, rhythm, you know, barely in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of night and day. Everything should be in flux and motion, and this river of life should flow within you. You do have a river of life in the blood and the chi and the vital force flowing. You should be flowing with that. You know, the states change in the heart that's present and is open multiple times a day, as we're taught. You know, and so if a person is this, you know, staunch, you know, and strict and rigid, and this is how things have to be, and this is my way or the highway, you know, that's not healthy, and it's not going to be conducive to health, to growth and good relationships.
Well, that's the antithesis of spirituality, because when you become rigid from a somatic perspective, you go into a sympathetic state, the activation, the fight and flight, which causes your vision to narrow.
Yeah.
Which is the antithesis of spirituality. Spirituality is to be able to pan out and see things. And so the moment you go into some rigidity, you have to realize that now you've lost perspective to some degree. Now, that's not to discount sometimes we need to focus in on things, but we also need to say, even if we disagree with someone outside, you know, coming from a different perspective, what are they speaking to though? Because what they're speaking to has a truth in it. And if we completely ignore that, it's a detriment. It's like, for example, someone sets up a business. Let's say I was using Doc Martens. I used to wear Doc Martens when I was a kid. So, and it's the best boot available. And I become so convinced by that. But then as time draws on, other people obviously reflect on the model that I've produced, and they think, and it's naturally, I can bring a better model now. I think I'm going to take the principles that they brought and advance it higher. Now, if I become reactive and say, no, this is the boot, and I refuse to change, then what's going to happen is I'm going to be, my business will collapse, because I'm not willing to pan out and see, well, hang on a minute, I need to see what people's needs are, what people's desires are, and address those based upon the principles of I have. If I just, jump into the trenches and hold, that's always going to, it's not going to bring dividends, and you're actually be left behind. So it's really important that the discussions that are coming out at the moment around these themes is we don't start sitting like uncles in the mosque saying, oh, in the old days it was better. That's coming from a place of frustration and a place of lack of ideas. If we just sit there and bemoan, it's not going to change the circumstances. We have to say, right, this is an issue. How do we address this based on the principles that we have? And when we do that, we always come with a much deeper, profound solution. But we have to sometimes let go of the externals in order to be able to speak to the needs of the people. And we see that the Shuyukh did this through it in every time. Is that like I only can reflect on Sheikh Al-Adawi from Mustaghanim in Algeria. He wrote theatrical plays on alcoholism. And he recognized that the children now are going to French schools. He brought in chairs and tables into the zawiyas where the children would be educated, because he understood the psychology. And it's really important that that we engage with our teachers and say, these are the issues and we need to address them. We can't just say, well, we're being attacked, this is a terrible thing. Well, what are we going to do about it? And I often say this, is that psychology is like sort of the language of this era, I feel. Just like Hellenistic Greek, philosophy was the language that people could relate to. As these different traditions and cultures were coming together, that was the language they could use in order to come to a shared understanding and be able to converse. Today, I feel psychology, and not just when I say psychology, I mean, there's lots of reactions to that word. What's meant by psychology? Are we talking about Freud? Are we speaking about, what are we speaking about? But we're not just talking about psychology, we're talking about neurology. We're speaking about all these different disciplines and sciences, that we bring this into and have that language available so people can actually relate to what we're saying. Because you've all had that experience. Some people read a few personal growth books and say, wow, this is in the Sunnah of our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But we had to go outside in order to appreciate what we have. We couldn't see it until we stepped outside. And so we're stepping outside, seeing what's in the current discourse, and reframing it according to our tradition. We need to do that, and ourselves and our teachers have to be brave enough to do that. And so we can provide a language so that we can present our tradition in a way that people can relate to it and meet people where they're at. I mean, that's a principle in our religion, meeting people where they're at.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we were talking a bit off camera before we started this, and I think that part of the problem is that when we start talking about these things that are sacred for all of us, I mean, these are, talking about spirituality, talking about the institutions, the tariqah, these things, for example, and again, we're not necessarily talking about that here. But people bring to mind these things when we start talking about spirituality, and maybe bringing in other elements to help people along, and maybe touching upon the possibility and the reality, really, of some spiritual abuse in the world that's happening, and how that relates to trauma, and just having that conversation, because it's there to be had. But we were talking and we're saying, in some way, it's like if we had an epidemic of, which we do now, of failing marriages, and there's a whole plethora of reasons why that happens. If one was to come and say, there's some really, deep things going wrong here across this community and maybe across the world, and we should be having a coalition to come together and talk about these things and find solutions for them, because it's grievously dangerous to not do anything about this. It's affecting the lives of millions of people every year. No one would say, oh, this person is attacking the institution of marriage. No one would say that reasonably. And so, when we come to talking about spirituality and talking about people's well-being and their sense of self, which has deep implications in their dunya and their akhirah, clearly, and you're on the ground too, and I see it too, and we're sharing a little bit of a few stories from our patients before this. It's like people, they're really struggling and on the ground, and they have deep needs, and no one's speaking to it, and they know in their minds, they know in their intellects that Allah is Rahman Rahim. Allah Ta'ala is there for them, and they have good sound aqidah. Maybe they even studied a book or two, and yet in their experience, they're terrified and they're shut down and they're anxious, and it's affecting their appetite, it's affecting their hormones, metabolism, their mood, their capacity to work, to get out of bed, to have relationships with their kids. Like, it's affecting everything. And those are needs and those are rights that they're not owing now, that they're not giving, that they owe, that will be heavy for them later too, and in the next life, when we rise and meet Allah Ta'ala. So this is deep. This is not a theoretical conversation. This is not a philosophical conversation. We're on the ground. We are meeting with people every day and seeing the implications and the consequences of not doing anything about this. This is what I know impels you every day. It compels me all the time as well. This is why we're having these conversations in the first place. This is why we're doing this. There's a need. Clearly, I mean, just if we were to observe around us, the communities, the families, the people, there's something wrong. There's something deeply wrong when people go to a community and they're coming out, leaving the faith, maybe, or the kids are going into, haram things. And it's like, whoa, okay, that is not the consequence or the outcome of a healthy environment. What's going on there? How can we optimize that to facilitate healthy growth and development and integration of the body and the mind and the soul and all of this agency? How do we do that? It's not an attack on the community. We're trying to help. So I really see it as like a, it's not a productive kind of criticism, in some way, though it means well. People, when they bring that, they mean well. Absolutely, they mean well. But, we want to be able to, again, expand and include and look down and say, what's going on? Or step away out of it and stand next to it and say, what's going on? How can we help? Ya Allah, help us. Like, I want this to be well, Ya Allah. Where can we go to find solutions for this? And that's what we're doing here. And it's not a negation of spirituality. And part of me, and I think we've talked about this previously, I kind of wish I can go back 5 years ago, 2015, and just like, I was in Jannah relatively. Literally just the way that I was relating to my experience and my spirituality and all of that, and my community, it was like, just in Jannah. Things are amazing, and I haven't lost that, but, I really I've stepped aside from it a little bit just to be able to see what's going on here and how can we be supported and give nasiha. Dino nasiha. We have to be able to be courageous enough. It's a difficult thing to do, to give nasiha when, no one's doing it and you see something that no one else sees and you're utterly compelled to say something. It's not an easy conversation. These are not easy conversations, and I totally respect that. But to negate it and to say this is an attack on the very thing we're trying to protect and save is, it's...
Yeah. And as I said, we're not necessarily being able to give solutions at the moment, but the first thing is naming the elephant in the room.
Yeah, name the elephant. Big.
Yeah, when I do couples therapy, it's like I'm not looking, like, if we become solution focused, we miss many of the things that we need to address. And so we just like, and it's so funny. When people come to me and said, well, my wife's doing this or my husband's doing this, what's the Islamic position? And I'm like, well, do you want, how are we going to solve this? We're going to solve it by who's right. Basically, that's the question: who's right, who's wrong? And it's not. We've got to move out from either or to both and.
Yes.
So you're not happy. You're not happy. Let's explore the system that you're in, this relationship that you're in. What's not working for you? What's not working for you? And what energies are we bringing to this? And it becomes an inquiry rather than You know, we want quick solutions. Well, tell her she's doing something wrong. Tell him that he needs to man up. You know, in my experience, that never solves anything,
No.
because people don't know what to do. And so we have to be able to marinate in what's going on, literally dwell in it, and then this doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. Like, get a feeling for it rather than intellectualizing and being solution focused. This does not feel right. Okay, what feels good then? If it, you know, when do you feel that something's good for you, and how can we move towards that then? Possibly, and we can explore that, and some methods might not work, some will, but are we willing to actually explore so we can move towards? And naturally, when you do that, then Allah's sort of power behind that moves you in that direction. That's what I've seen many times in couples therapy. And we as a community, and that's just a one aspect. This has those principles, we need those in the community as well, of coming together as a community, saying, yep, it ain't working.
Totally. I totally see that. You know, I totally see that. And I feel that there is a burgeoning kind of awareness of these things, though it's still nascent, but I'm really excited to be able to bring this to, you know, the community and be, inshallah ta'ala, an impetus for its development, because this is a core need. And I mean, honestly, I feel burdened by it almost. I mean, alhamdulillah, not to the point where, you know, it's toxic or anything, but it really, I feel compelled. Like, I cannot just sit on the sidelines anymore. I can't just check out now. I'm too in, and you know, I've seen too much. You know, really, I can't. I'm all in, and so being able just to bring the conversation is one thing. Being able to bring in the ulama, inshallah, which is is another thing. And then being able to bridge the gap between people on the ground, the ulama, you know, and find these solutions. If they are to be found, they're to be found in the integration of the people, you know, with the text and with the prophetic light and the inheritance, people on the ground and the activists and the support and the helpers and the healers, and how, and in that, I really believe that kind of top down, bottom up maybe approach, we can begin to see and hold the space for what will come from Allah Ta'ala. The spirit of you know, of need will, Allah yujib al-muttar, you know, just if there's ittirar, this dire need, help us, Ya Allah.
That's what's interesting, and I think our leaders need the sense of that ittirar. Like, sometimes our leaders feel like we've got to hold our stuff together, and we've got to be the authority and answer those things. And the Prophet ﷺ wasn't like that. You know, he'd consult. And we've given that example before, Salama, when he went to her, or at Badr, where he, you know, people came forward, and we have to have the courage to say to our teachers, hang on a minute, something's not right, and our teachers not shut us down, but rather say to us, okay, let's explore this together, and it be collaborative rather than us outsourcing everything. This is the loss of agency now, where, no, I've got to go to my teacher and he's got to have the answer. When he gives the answer, I can say, I have the courage to say, and he's open for me to say, or she's open for me to say, you know, when you offer that, this comes up for me, and this is my struggle with that. What do you have to say? You know, and it's not putting him on the spot or her on the spot. It's really, let's have a conversation. And Mawlid Arabi Darqawi says in the letters, I love the mudhakara. He says, I hate the silent murid. He says, he says, when we're speaking about realities, I want to see what comes forth from you.
MashaAllah.
And we need to have an essence of that. We need to feel that, is that we can come to our teachers and say, this is an issue. And sometimes our teachers say, you know, let's see what Allah, let's sit and marinate and see what Allah brings. Not that I have to have the answer.
I don't know is half of knowledge. Being able just to really bring it here too. Why it's not just in the fiqh, in the furu' and whatever, but, you know, bring it here. I don't know. I want to know. Ya Allah.
Yeah.
Help
and let's bring in so-and-so. Maybe I've heard he's an expert in this field. Let's bring him forth, and let's include him in the discussion. And, you know, explore it together. And that exploration, that inquiry, what we're doing here is what's it brings a whole different flavor and zest to and it's so relieving as well. I hated having debates, because debates like, oh, I've got to counteract that argument. I used to get anxiety in debates. And I love this sort of, as you say that, this comes up for me, and you know, I don't know how to answer it. What would you say to that? And just being really curious. That's just so different. I just don't really see that I called it maturity, basically, to and I've never seen many things solved in debate, to be honest. But I feel that when we're open to exploring, we're more likely to come up with solutions that everyone will accept, rather than become defensive about.
Absolutely. Alhamdulillah. So on that note, I want to thank you then, CD, for today's conversation and opening this up for us, allowing
No
this.
problem. You too.
I can't do this alone. I can't alone.
Neither can I. I won't do this unless Mazin grabs me and says, let's speak about this. You know? Or I'm just sitting in my kitchen.
Yeah, exactly.
Thinking about it in my head, but not really. I never get the courage to say, I need to do some Instagram video now on this. You know? So it's when someone else says, you know, puts the duty on me, it's your duty. Then I say, okay, I'll do it now.
Well, I really appreciate you, CD. Yeah. And, you know, so, I mean, at the end, you know, I guess in summary, maybe this idea of wholeness, you know, this idea of wholeness is so critical, that we just be able to include as much as possible.
Yeah.
You know, I just came, you know, to me now, but, you know, I think it was Ibn Qayyim that said that the ruh of Sayyidina Muhammad is as big as the kawn, the size of the kawn. Just that's why he's rahmatul alameen, you know, he was just vast. And more whole that we can become, and that's more inclusive we can become. And be able to hold opposites and all of that. I really believe health comes from that. Health comes from health. The word health comes from health. And even the word holiness, which is on the theme of spirituality here. Holiness, the sacredness will emerge from wholeness. When there's wholeness, we are muwahidun. We are people that make things one. We are ruthless in our tawheed, and we make things one. So how can we make ourselves one and make our communities one and healthy and holy? And that's what this pursuit's all about, you know. And if we can offer anything for that, alhamdulillah. And if not, then at least we're opening up the door for whatever can emerge on Allah's appointed time and all of that, inshallah ta'ala.
Yeah. I mean, the exercise on that is like, how do we notice when we get into patterns of either or, like, and can I move it into a both and in my conversations? So how often do we say, no, it's either got to be this way or it's got to be that way? Even if I disagree with that, what does that speak to? And this ability to be inclusive, I think that's really important, that, you know, get a sense of that, oh, look, I'm splitting off here. I'm not really including.
Love that. Thank you. Okay. Jazakallah ta'ala khairan.
No problem.
Thank you very much. Inshallah, we'll continue this conversation next time. For all of you, if you found this useful, please like and share with your networks, your people. We want to be able to expand this conversation, inshallah ta'ala. Like I mentioned earlier, please leave your comments, leave your requests for future topics, or any questions for us to clarify in future episodes, inshallah ta'ala. And we ask Allah ta'ala for acceptance and tawfiq, inshallah ta'ala. Till next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You take care.